Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you joining us today as I speak about the state of affairs in the U.S. accounts receivable management industry in 2020. 2020 has been quite a year for all of us, both on a personal as well as on a professional level. From the global pandemic leading to over 240,000 deaths and still counting, causing lockdowns, stay at home orders, work and school from home requirements, to all the social unrest across our country, to the polarizing election, to the major fires out west and storms in the Gulf. I think we can easily say that we've been through a lot in 2020. I, for one, am looking forward to the world returning to some semblance of normalcy in 2021. John, please fire up our presentation. Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. Take a minute, please, and read this disclaimer. I'm going to be sharing some information rapid fire over the next maybe 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes tops. But please, this is not intended to be legal or financial advice of any kind. And I ask that you just don't come after me about the accuracy of this information. Thank you for your cooperation. Next slide, please. These are the discussion topics for today. We're going to look back at the industry that was before the coronavirus. We're going to discuss some big industry trends and developments, economic conditions, compliance landscape, and how two major market segments are reacting and adapting. Then we'll wrap this up. John, next slide, please. Excellent, thank you. Before the coronavirus pandemic hit in March of 2020, the U.S. accounts receivable management industry was positioned very strong. In 2019, the entire accounts receivable management industry generated an approximate $18.6 billion in revenue, a 4% increase from the previous year. Prior to the pandemic, we expected the industry to grow at an average annual rate of nearly 5% to $22.4 billion in 2023. Much of this growth is being driven by technology advancement and regulatory clarity. On the technology side, armed companies embracing new tech such as interactive voice response, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as big data could make collections more efficient and improve recovery outcomes. On the regulatory side, the release of the CFPB's new debt collection rule on October 30th will eventually give armed firms clearer rules of the road that they really have not had before, allowing them to reduce certain compliance expenditures and avoid lawsuits potentially. The industry's growth will also be supported by burgeoning consumer debt, which I will get to a little bit later in this presentation. John, let's go to the industry estimate tables. I want to share the results of research that we did as Calkin Ginsberg Company in partnership with the ACA late last year and the early part of this year. We administered a survey to a sampling of armed companies around the country, various disciplines, in order to assess their operational and financial performance in 2018 on behalf of the association. The survey results show that the arm industry was indeed in a very strong position at the end of the decade. In 2018, the arm industry collectively recovered, easy for me to say, around the arm industry in 2018 collectively recovered approximately $102.6 billion in debt, roughly 31% increase in only 2 years. Placements in terms of face value, meanwhile, increased by over 16% the same time period. The industry earned about $12.5 billion in commissions, which constituted a rise of nearly 15% from 2016. John, next slide, please. Let's look at some trends during the pandemic. Placement levels and recovery efforts varied really from sector to sector as well as from region to region. For example, quite a few states and municipal level government clients ceased collection activities and only recently started them back up after more than 6 months of stoppage. We saw the same stoppage initially in healthcare, but that was for a shorter period of time. Placements slowed considerably and stopped really due to some stoppage of these elective procedures altogether, so healthcare providers can focus intently on the coronavirus pandemic. Financial services, on the other hand, performed really well during the pandemic. We believe this sector will continue to perform as well as consumer debts continue to increase. Work from home. Well, it's just extraordinary to me how quickly small, medium, large, and jumbo accounts receivable management firms were able to take their show back home and bring hundreds, if not thousands, of employees from various locations inside the United States, as well as call centers in the Philippines and India. This pandemic wasn't limited to US and North America. So when you look at offshore and nearshore capabilities, companies were doing mammoth amount of work in a very short period of time, literally days, to move employees to be able to work productively from home. Tremendous. And I think going forward, work from home will continue at some portion of the firms. Some will return back to offices, but some portion of the firms will have the ability to work from home as well. Technology was the hot topic earlier this year before the coronavirus set in. I remember vividly sitting at the RMAI in February, which, by the way, was the last time I was on a plane, the last time I was at a conference, and the last time I was in Vegas. And I can tell you, after 7-8 months, I'm ready to get back on a plane. I'm ready to go to live events, and I am also ready to go back to Vegas. But as my wife said, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Discussions around artificial intelligence and machine learning replacing bill collectors, and the regulators really finally catching up with technology advancement decades after the FDCPA was written back in 1977, were really the key topics that we were discussing back at this last live event. Technology is absolutely there. People are utilizing technology, and they've demonstrated the security of working from home on very precious data and being able to do so remotely as well as in the office without jeopardizing confidentiality and also without jeopardizing the usage of tens of millions of accounts, whether it's work from the office or work from home. Operational strategies were also adjusted to connect with consumers, many of whom were impacted positively by government stimulus, as well as negatively by furloughs and job losses. Mergers and acquisitions, a topic that is still very near and dear to my heart, came to a relative standstill until late July as companies and investors alike really tried to make sense of the effects of the pandemic and demands that started rebounding considerably in July and haven't stopped since. We think that M&A will continue to be a hot topic for the remainder of this year, as well as 2021 and beyond. John, let's look at the economic overview and bring me to the recovering labor market slide, please. The civilian unemployment rate, which tracks those employed persons who are willing and able to work and who have actively sought work within the past 4 weeks, amounted to 3.5% in February. I chuckle because this was tied for the lowest rate ever recorded. At the beginning of the pandemic, however, the labor market took an unprecedented hit as millions of people lost their job within the span of really just a few short weeks. By April, the unemployment rate skyrocketed to 14.7, nearly 15%. Again, from 3.5% in February to nearly 15% in April, the highest figure recorded since the government began tracking this data back in 1948. That's a tremendous pendulum change. And since then, the unemployment rate has fallen nearly as dramatically as it rose. And in September, it was roughly 8%. The takeaway here, folks, is that while the labor market is recovering, it still has a long way from a position of strength. For the arm industry, unemployment tends to have a mixed effect. While high unemployment rates lead to more consumers defaulting on their loans and leading to more business opportunities for bill collectors, jobless consumers can have a tough time paying back the debts that they owe if they don't have a solid source of income or if their confidence levels are shot. Be sure, and I can't emphasize this enough, folks, be sure to factor in unemployment into your budgets and your forecast. It's a critical data point. John, bring us to the resurgent pandemic slide, please. Unfortunately, the country is facing a resurgence of new cases after they declined significantly in August and early September, as you can see from this graph of CDC data. The trend may only intensify as we move into the winter and people start gathering indoors. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's where the virus tends to spread a lot more than in outdoor settings. It is likely that states and local governments will start to re-implement restrictions on both individuals as well as businesses. We may see travel issues and travel restrictions, but certainly businesses, and they're talking about doing this at a very micro instead of macro level, even by zip codes, closing down businesses in badly affected areas. The broader economic implications of resurgent coronavirus and reimposed restrictions could absolutely impact recovery efforts, collection levels, as well as placement levels going forward. So pay particular attention to these developments as well. John, let's look at the compliance landscape. The compliance landscape is rapidly evolving. I encourage each and every one of you to listen to our Business Revolution Roundtable discussions, which are available free of any charge as long as you register to the Roundtable, to the Revolution, and they'll be available for months after the Revolution. So that is not intended to be a shameless plug, but more so to tell you that I carefully selected subject matter experts, and our firm individually selected the topics that we think were most critical, including breaking down the CFPB debt collection rule, the FCC's recent notice on proposed rulemaking stating its intent to review and potentially revise a number of existing exemptions to certain TCPA requirements. Some important Supreme Court rulings were also discussed. State level regulations were addressed, as well as the impact of the 2020 election that as of now, November 6th, still hasn't been concluded. John, let's go to market sectors, first industry-wide. Before I jump into trends in a specific markets, such as financial services and healthcare, I want to just take a look at the total collections by each market vertical, which you now see on your screen. As of December 31st, 2018, healthcare represented the largest market segment for accounts receivable management firms, making up nearly 26% of total collections. The second largest market at the time was financial services, accounting for 24% of collections. Within financial services, this included card and auto collections at 10% and 5% of those totals. Other financial services includes things such as HELOCs and mortgages, commercial loans, and other areas. The third largest market segment at the time was student loans, both federal and private at 10% of aggregated recoveries. I think we all kind of understand what's happened with the student loan market and specifically the debacle that we call the U.S. Department of Ed. But we're expecting that this number has gone down considerably and will continue to go down in 2021 as the U.S. Department of Ed stopped collections back in March of 2020. John, let's go to the healthcare slide. Hospitals are really facing significant shortfalls. According to a report by the American Hospital Association from March 1st to June 30th, hospitals suffered, you're not going to get me wrong when I say this number, they suffered $202.6 billion in lost profits due to heightened costs from the coronavirus hospitalizations and protective equipment that they had to get as quickly as they possibly could to make sure that their frontline healthcare providers were protected from the virus that they were working so hard to fight. They also realized significantly diminished revenue due to cancellations of elected services and procedures that only recently started up again. Healthcare providers are also facing pressures both from government and from the broader public to forgive bad debts due to unprecedented natures of how these people lost their coverage during the pandemic. While the federal government did not implement a moratorium on collections of medical debts, various politicians, such as Senator Bernie Sanders, indicated their desire for such a moratorium by introducing a bill in March that ultimately wasn't implemented. However, even though the bill was not passed and a moratorium did not make its way into the economic stimulus passed by Congress back in the first quarter and into the second quarter of this year, it signals that Democratic parties are posturing for greater leniency for medical debts. While the uncertainty generated by the coronavirus pandemic has made healthcare collections chaotic this year, in the long term, medical debts should continue growing at a steady pace as they did for 20 years leading up to the global pandemic. And really, unless Congress legislates medical collections out of existence, which didn't happen back in 1992 under the Clinton administration and the Hillary factor, it won't happen now, as we expect that healthcare collections will continue to see substantial growth and business opportunities for the remainder of this year, but certainly into 2021 and beyond. John, let's look at financial services. This market segment has been really extremely favorable for accounts receivable management companies in recent years. This segment of the industry really suffered from the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, and then the years that followed with very, very low amounts of new loan originations, coupled with various efforts to try and recover these accounts that dropped considerably. Now, total net charge-offs grew tremendously in 2019 at a rate of nearly 10%. Total credit card debt declined in the second quarter 2020 by $51 billion from a prior year of $76 billion. But we typically see these declines in credit card debt in the first quarter of the year as people use their bonuses as well as tax money to pay down debt. A decline in the second quarter is very rare. The last such time that a decline occurred was in the middle of the Great Recession. What's happening here is that consumers were using their stimulus payments, which they received in April or May, as I had said, to pay down these debts. But in addition, thanks to a nationwide shutdown and social distancing requirements, consumers' discretionary spending on things like eating out and going to the movies absolutely tanked, giving consumers as well as small businesses the opportunity to kind of pay down debt and do some other investing and other things that they wanted to do with the money that they now realized when the expenses of going out or going to the movies, going to sporting events actually dropped. On the other hand, the severe delinquency percentage, which represents the portion of credit card debt that is 90 days plus delinquent, spiked to 9.8% from 9.1% the previous quarter. This is unlikely the result, this is likely the result of job losses, furloughs, and cut hours. Thanks to this, the volume of bad debt actually in the credit card arena actually rose to 79.9, nearly $80 billion in Q2 2020 from some $72 billion just 1 year prior. For armed companies servicing financial services and financial institutions, as well as fintech type companies, credit unions, etc., the rise in credit card delinquencies should be an encouraging sign. It is likely that the Q3 data in 2020 will reflect an even greater increase in delinquent credit card debt as the effects of the first wave of government stimulus have faded. John, if you could bring up the last slide, which is the first slide once again. This concludes our review of the state of affairs in the U.S. accounts receivable management industry. The global pandemic has not changed our long-term outlook for the industry at all. We strongly believe that the industry will emerge stronger than ever before. Collectors will take advantage of both new technologies, rising consumer debts to expand their business and increase their profits. As long as we live in a capitalistic economy, there will always be a need for bill collectors and for the collection-related services that various accounts receivable management companies continue to provide. Thank you for your time today. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me, Mike Ginsberg, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you agree with this data, if you disagree with this data, whatever the case might be. We appreciate that. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope and pray that you continue to be healthy in this marketplace and your loved ones and your employees as well. Thank you.